Today we will be learning about the wet into wet method. First you need your primary source objects, some heavy duty paper, paintbrushes in varying sizes, Indian ink and water. Firstly, take out your heavy duty card paper, like watercolour paper. You're then going to need to wet your paintbrush, preferably a bigger sized brush, to evenly coat the page with water. The more water you apply, the more abstract your image will become, and the less water you apply, the more precise your image will become. Then take a paintbrush with ink. You can water it down or use it straight from the bottle, depending on how pigmented you want your image. Begin to sketch out your image. I had a lot of water on the page, so it blew out quite quickly, which I like, as I don't like it to be too defined. This is me drawing the teapot. As you see, it blows out quite a bit. Next, I'm moving on to the plant pot. You don't have to be too precise because your image will blow out anyway, depending on how much water you have on your page. I prefer a more abstract look, but if you want it to be more realistic, you can add less water to your page and use your ink watered down slightly. Here I'm just making the leaves by doing dots and letting them blow out. You can really be experimental with this, with the different levels of ink, letting it dry in between and using differentiating pigments. Different techniques, blobbing, brushing, sculpting. As you see, everything begins to blow out into each other, which creates quite a dark image. The more I go on, the more difficult it is to identify what everything is, which I like because it's an abstract way of making a piece of art with a direction, following a method. Here I am just adding in details like the table. And defining the teapot a little bit more, which actually makes it a lot darker and blow out a lot more. I find it interesting to see how the ink bleeds in different ways and patterns. Next, I'm going to show you what it's like when you use less water on your page with more watered down ink. It's a lot more precise and you have a lot more control. So I'm wetting the page just slightly, less than I did last time, evenly dispersing it with the brush. And next I go in with some water on my brush. As you can see, the pigment's a lot lighter, doesn't blow out quite as much, and you've much more control. The more you go over lines, the darker they become. Here I'm just creating the same image. Personally, I prefer the darker ink, as I like how you can interpret the different shapes it makes, like an ink blotch. Although I know some people like to work more precisely, so this method might work better. The aim of this method is not to create a realistic, perfect image. It is supposed to happen naturally and make unique, organic images. It's important to use good quality paper when doing the wet into wet method, because if you use printer paper, it will just disintegrate from the water. Card would do, anything that's a little bit stronger. Here I'm using just some watercolor sketchpad paper. So you can see the more I go over the lines, the darker they become. Then I go in with just pure ink to sharpen up lines. So with this method you can really go as detailed or as abstract as you like. It's really interesting to see the same thing being done twice and how different the outcomes come out depending on the level of ink. And here I'm just going in and adding some details which I didn't have the opportunity to do in the previous one, as there was a lot of ink blowout. This way is a lot more precise, but still has the wet into wet effect, which differentiates it from just an ink drying. The longer your design sits, the more it blows out. As you can see, it's getting more and more blown out as we go. The ink seeps into the different textures of the page, so if you're using a smooth card, it mightn't get those little squares that you can see on the paper I'm using there. So I'm just defining the teapot more. It's a lot easier to tell what it is now because of the more precise method. And here I am going in to do the plant. As you can see for the leaves of the plant, I use the same method of blobbing the ink and allowing it to disperse itself, but here I'm using solid ink. In things like plants, it's really nice to have the organic shapes. working with organic shapes is preferred for a method like this because it's hard to be quite precise. And that is just 2 of the ways you can use the wet into wet method.